Oh my God, it's the fourth year of the Carla and Crappy Show. I don't know how else to start this because that's just a number that I can't even fathom. I'm Crappy down there in Nashville. That's Carla. Say hi, Carla.
Hi, Carla. No, hi, Crappy. 4 years, like really? We were just talking about that. Like 4 years, people have been watching us talk about football. I don't know why, but
yeah, I don't have any reason why either. But it's cool. We're gonna do this again. For the 3 or 4 of you who are have never maybe watched this before. I'm an Ohio State fan. I live in Pittsburgh. I really that's sort of how I come at this college football thing. Sort of demented fandom. Carla has an actual past life as a sports writer. What are your credentials, Carla?
What are my credentials? Well, we used to work together, actually.
Yes.
That was how we met. And I was on the sports staff there at the local suburban Pittsburgh newspaper. And then I went and worked for this little company that we may have heard of called Yahoo. Yeah. And I worked there on the sports staff for a couple of years, working through the Rivals.com team. Mm-hmm. So I have some experience there. And I happen to be marrying a sports writer. So I'm kind of in this for the long haul. So whether I want to or not, football will always be a thing in my life, I think.
Now, as we were talking before we went on the air, actually, with your experience, you're sort of up here, and me, my myopic view of college football was down here. But as you get more and more removed from your direct experience with sports writing, I think somewhere, and I don't know if this year or some point, we're going to sort of meet in the middle. And
this episode in particular, because you sent me a text yesterday saying, "Hey, you want to talk about college football on the interwebs?" And I said, "Yes, but I've done no prep, so this is going to be fun." I'm learning on the fly.
That'll be my goal. That'll be my goal for this year. I'm going to pass Carla.
Yes.
That's not going to happen.
Yes, it will. Yeah, it could happen. I believe it could happen. Because I am a demented Ohio State fan, I need to take just a moment and bask in my national championship.
Okay, that's plenty. And actually that's a good place to start because we're in the playoff era and there's a Final Four, and I thought it worked pretty well. Obviously, that worked out pretty well for me. But the whole process, yeah. the whole process. And certainly was validated by how it turned out.
Absolutely.
So let's take a look. If we have thoughts about who the Final Four might be this year. What do you think? Okay,
you're throwing that directly at me.
Yeah.
So again, I can cheat because I happen to have a sports writer in the condo with me. So I bounced this idea off of him. And I will admit that I have been listening to a lot of college football podcasts. I haven't necessarily been reading up, but that's my thing. I have a long commute, so I listen to podcasts. And so I've been listening up on a lot of things, and I think this is the year. There's still a lot of unknowns with this college football playoff, which we talked about a little bit in Bowlapalooza when we had the 4 of us on the show. Mm-hmm. At the end of last year, there were a lot of unknowns with the committee and whether or not they would even think about putting 2 teams from the same conference in, or whether they would go straight conference champions. With the way everything is kind of shaping up this year and what limited knowledge I have of what's happening in the different conferences, I think this might be the year that you're going to see not just 1, but maybe 2 conferences left out of the playoff. Mm-hmm. And my logic there is because there's no clear-cut favorite in the Pac-12 right now. And I think there's a lot of good teams out there, but I really see them all beating up on each other. And so I think the Pac-12 is gonna have to have somebody make a run, or they might get left out. Mm-hmm. And I think the same can be said for the ACC. Mm-hmm. Because right now Florida State is kind of still the front runner, but I've not heard a convincing argument right now that they're the clear runaway favorite. I've heard some rumblings on Clemson, but we all know how Clemson likes to Clemson itself. Is this really Clemson's year? I don't know. So I think there's a legitimate possibility that Pac-12 and ACC get left out. So the way I'm going is I know I live in SEC country, and I'm coming with a little bit of an SEC bias. I'm almost a resident now. I've been here for 5 years, moving on year 6.
You're picking Vanderbilt?
God, no. I'm not that
just
silly.
Check it. Just want to make
sure. Go anchor down, go doors. I don't know. Anyhow, I think this is the year that both Alabama and Auburn get in.
Okay.
So I think we're going to see Alabama and Auburn in there. I think you're going to see the Big 12 champion, who I'm going to say will be TCU, and the Big 10 champion, who to me comes down to your Buckeyes and Michigan State. And I want to talk a little bit more in depth when we get to your Buckeyes, which that's a game we're going to talk about this week, for obvious reasons, because it's Virginia Tech. But I think it'll come down to those two teams, and at this point, I'm leaning Michigan State, and you'll find out why when we talk about that game. But that would be my final four: Michigan State, TCU, Alabama, and Auburn.
Okay. I got stuck. I got stuck with the SEC as well. Obviously, I'm going to stick with Ohio State to take one slot. I don't see, given the way that the Alabama season ended last year, I don't see any way that Alabama does not make it to the Final Four this year. I think this is going to have Nick Saban's attention. I know there's a lot of hand wringing about lack of quarterbacks in Tuscaloosa. I don't think that's a huge problem. But do we see Auburn? Do we see the Southern Cal team that appears to be rejuvenated?
Yeah.
That's tough to pick. If we have two SEC West teams make the Final Four, that means we're picking what is kind of essentially we're picking one team that won't even make it to the conference championship game.
Yeah.
Which is a thing that I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around. Although, I mean, if we're looking at full resume, and it comes down to Alabama or Auburn or Auburn and LSU, or I mean, there's some close to interchangeable parts in there.
Right.
That's a possibility. What I wrote down, and you have stuff crossed out here, because I'm struggling with this a little bit. But when I wrote my Final Four, that I wrote down Ohio State, Alabama, Southern Cal, and TCU. I don't see participant from the ACC. I wonder about the other possibility that you mentioned. Pac-12 maybe getting shut out. I wonder if it's possible that the Big 12 gets shut out again, and in part because they don't have a conference championship game. So if you're suddenly looking at two SEC teams making the Final Four, is TCU or Baylor? Those are the two likely choices. Are they left out of the equation again because their season ends early and they lack that one extra game to prove that they belong there? So possibility. Although in what I have written down at this point, I have a TCU making it in.
Yeah, TCU is a better case of a Big 12 team making it in than Baylor does. Baylor's schedule is terrible. And so if it comes down, I think if Baylor wins the Big 12, then I think you're right. I think there could be another argument that the Big 12 gets left out. If TCU wins, they've got a stronger strength of schedule. I think they would get in if they only had one loss. So, but yeah, the Big 12 is an interesting debate.
I think it's something that they without question, they have to address. They kind of hung tough, stuck to their guns after what happened at the end of last season. But at some point, got it. And if this comes up again this year, I bet you see that changes pretty quickly. We have a full slate of actual college football games this weekend. It's starting. We're recording this on Wednesday, and there are games on Thursday night. We have some that are at least in name pretty solid matchups. Starting with the Jerry Jones kickoff extravaganza in Arlington. Something that he's managed to make a regular thing. This is also how many times has Alabama played in this game? Is this like, can we call this the Jerry Jones Alabama Bowl or something?
Saban Bowl or something? Yeah, they played in it quite a bit.
That would be good. Wisconsin and Alabama meet on the neutral field. Alabama is a 10-point favorite in this one. What do you think?
I think it's a great matchup to start the season. I think if you really kind of wanted to point a game that this was kind of the linchpin of the weekend. I think this is the one that's kind of going to get everybody excited. You've already mentioned about the lack of quarterbacks in Tuscaloosa and how that's kind of making everybody nervous. There's 3 people down there, including one that was mentioned in all the preseason magazines, who's now completely fallen off the radar. So they've got 4 quarterbacks kind of in the mix. Jake Coker seems to be the favorite at this point, but of course Saban's not tipping his hand, so you never know. So yes, there's some angst over that. Lots of turnover in general on offense, which is a little bit unusual for a Nick Saban team. But again, this never seems to be a problem for Nick Saban. So will it be a problem again this year, or will it be a problem at all this year? It's hard to say at this point. Defensive line returns a lot. So I think defensively they're going to be just fine. It's just whether or not they can figure out what they're doing on offense, which again has never been a problem. On the Wisconsin side, Joel Stave is still the quarterback at Wisconsin. Add him to that list of like kids that never seem to graduate. Yes, Joel Stave is still the quarterback at Wisconsin. But it's an interesting kind of situation up there now with Paul Chryst being the head coach. Paul Chryst also being the same guy who recruited Joel Stave to Wisconsin when he was offensive coordinator. So you got to think that Stave is going to feel a lot more comfortable in that offense this year. He had some struggles isn't necessarily the correct word for it that he had at the beginning of the year last year. I think we're going to see an immediate correction of that in this year. And you don't want to be the running back that has to replace Melvin Gordon, do you?
That is what Wisconsin does.
That's true.
They run out a solid tailback who's there for a year or two, and just goes and goes and goes. So
right. So that's an interesting thing for them, and of course, adding some questions to that is the fact that there's some huge offensive line questions.
Yeah.
And so your typical ground and pound Wisconsin offense might not be quite so groundy or poundy this year. It's weird. That's Big Ten football, right?
Yes,
and
yes.
It's going to be really interesting to see how that all kinds of played out, because if anybody gets hurt, there's no depth at all on that offensive line. So they're kind of in trouble on that. The one interesting thing that I did note about Wisconsin's defense is that they did retain their defensive coordinator, which is huge, Dave Aranda, and he's got a really interesting scheme. He had a really interesting scheme last year. That's kind of an interesting card to play against an Alabama team that doesn't know what they're doing on offense yet. So I think that's an interesting matchup. The way I see it playing out, yes, this is essentially a home game for Alabama. Let's not, make any jokes about that. It's going to be a very heavy Tide crowd there. I think Wisconsin makes this game really interesting in the first half. It would not surprise me if Wisconsin took the lead into the half, or was tied at the half. I think Alabama finds a way to win because, well, they're Alabama. And I just think that atmosphere, I'm not sure Wisconsin is quite ready yet for that stage. I think if this game was played at the end of the season, it could be a completely different story. But I think right now, Alabama it'll be close in the first half, and Alabama will find a way to win the game.
You kind of, not directly, but you sort of mentioned the things that I was looking at. The strength of Alabama's team, if you're looking at specific units, is the defensive line. And that matches up against what should be the strength of a Wisconsin football team, and that is a strong running game. That is, it's deliberate. It's going to move the ball. It's going to eat up clock, and then it's going to score at the end. I don't know that Wisconsin has that in place. I think your assessment's pretty good. Both of these teams kind of finished the season last year on a sort of disappointing note, to one common opponent, and I'm wondering. So they finish up with questions. Obviously, you've got a lot of time to address stuff, but this is the first time back out for both of them. Obviously, I think it probably is a tight game. As I mentioned, the line may work out to be about right. Alabama by 10, but this should be an entertaining one to watch for up until halftime or the third quarter maybe, and then I think Alabama will pull away a little bit. We take a team from Texas and bring them up to what should be Big Ten country, although it's at South Bend, Indiana. The Longhorns at Notre Dame. Notre Dame is also a 9 or 10 point favorite. I saw a couple different lines in there. What do you think? Is Notre Dame for real this year?
Gosh, that depends on who you ask, right? I've seen them kind of all over the board. I'll give you my analysis, and then I'll ask you if Notre Dame is for real. No, I've seen people even talking as much as Notre Dame potentially playing spoiler in the playoff. I've seen that. As is my usual, because we both grew up in Big Ten country, I'm always skeptical of Notre Dame, especially when they're, it seems that Malik Zaire flat out won the job, which is why Everett Golson transferred. And so, but he's still a bit of an unknown, really, in that offense. I mean, he played some last year, but is he ready for this full time? I think that's still a huge question, and it's kind of interesting that they're putting all of this in. But I mean, for crying out loud, they're loaded on defense. True. They've got 10 returning starters, and actually it's really 11 because the guy who's not technically the returning starter was suspended last year for academic reasons. So essentially their entire defense is returning. And yes, that defense had some questions last year, but when you've got an entire unit like that returning, it's got to mean good things. So I think Notre Dame's going to be strong defensively. Will they be able to figure out the offense? That's the huge question, and whether or not Zaire is ready. Texas, interesting that they're traveling to South Bend. That's kind of an interesting trip for them in week 1. Charlie Strong, year 2, has a good track record in year 2. That was kind of when he started turning things around at Louisville. And so I think you're starting to see a little bit of excitement around this Longhorns program just because of that, because usually the first year is kind of let's get to know each other, and the second year you start making some strides. They've got some great running backs, but whether or not that's going to matter, because they have offensive line questions too. They're kind of in the same boat as Wisconsin. They don't have a line. And they only have 5 returning starters on defense, but their defensive line should be okay. So there's still, as is always seems to be the case with Charlie Strong teams, there's some pretty big questions, but usually he figures out a way to coach those guys up, and they win games they're not supposed to win. I don't think that's the case here because, I mean, for crying out loud, they're playing in South Bend. If this was a neutral site game, I think it might be a little bit more interesting. But I think the road trip kind of sways this game for me. Even with as inexperienced as Zaire is, I think he's going to do just fine and with that home-friendly environment. And I think Notre Dame wins this.
Okay. Go ahead.
What do you think about Notre Dame?
Ask me. Please ask me. Please ask me.
What do you think about Notre Dame?
The thing about, particularly the defense, they were returning so many people, and they return a good number of starters on the offense as well. How excited do you get about what were they 8-5 last year? How excited do you get about an 8-5 team returning most of its starters? Yes, there's a you gain some experience, and that will always help even things out a little bit. I think the bigger thing that's going on here, especially for people who want to kind of suggest that Notre Dame might be a Final Four contender or someplace close to that when the season's over. I've never understood the tendency to overrate Notre Dame the way Notre Dame is almost always overrated. And this is it's a little personal frustration. The notion when we were under the BCS system that just some relatively minor things had to happen for Notre Dame to get an automatic berth in one of those games. This is all set up, and I know the reason. I know the reason. It's television money and blah 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 blah. But it's just a source of endless aggravation for me. Having said that, in this game, and you touched on the thing, questions with Texas's offense. You do think Charlie Strong is going to make that work. I'm not sure that this is the game where that's going to happen because that is a very good, very experienced now Notre Dame defense. And having to play on the road, that's going to be the thing. The line again looks pretty good. Notre Dame by 10. I think that's a comfy win for them. On Memorial Day, on Labor Day week, with Labor Day night in Blacksburg, Virginia. We relive this is my second nightmare from Ohio State's 2015 season. The first biggest nightmare was actually when JT Barrett was injured in Michigan.
Yes.
Because it's like, okay, this is done.
And that worked out for you, okay?
Yeah, it did. But without question, the one close behind that was sitting and just watching Ohio State not be able to do anything against a bizarre defensive scheme put on the field by Frank Beamer, which I mentioned. What this is what Wisconsin does, and that is what Virginia Tech does. So Ohio State has to deal with the same thing when they go into Blacksburg on Monday night. What do you see happening?
Monday Night Football in college. I like it.
Yes.
Not quite as good as Maction, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
So there's, I hate to say not a lot has changed between these two teams since they met last year, but that is kind of a true statement other than the fact that Ohio State has won a national championship. Minor thing, yeah. Michael Brewer is still the quarterback at Virginia Tech, and he actually played pretty well. It was one of the few games he played pretty well last year against your Buckeyes, which is kind of an interesting thing. And Virginia Tech still might be the best defense in the ACC. Yeah. Not a lot has changed there. You could argue that pretty easily. Brewer had a good game against your Buckeyes, had kind of a miserable midseason, turned the ball over a lot. He started to correct that towards the end of last year, so you've got to hope that trend continues upwards if you're a Hokies fan at this point. Defensively, Virginia Tech also has an All-American corner in Randall Fuller, who should be a pretty high draft pick if he decides to exit early. I believe he's a junior. I am fascinated by your Buckeyes for a lot of different reasons. Too many quarterbacks, but when has that ever been a problem?
Right.
Does it matter who starts? I really don't think so. I think you can't go wrong with either Barrett or Cardale. I think you'll be fine with either one of them. Some concerns that I have going into the game are the offensive suspensions for this game. Because you have you're going to be missing several key parts. And then, of course, the loss of Joey Bosa on defense cannot be underestimated. But why I'm intrigued by your Buckeyes and why I was leaning Michigan State in my playoff is actually because it has nothing to do with the players on the team and has everything to do with Urban Meyer. Because the last time Urban Meyer was defending a national championship, he was at Florida. Right. And if we remember back to when that happened, it was towards the end of that season when he announced his retirement. This is a pressure-filled situation, and it's going to be very interesting to watch Urban Meyer go through this again, trying to defend a national championship. It's not easy. Ask Florida State. There's a lot of pressure here for him, and especially with a just like at Florida, you've got a rabid fan base, at Ohio State. That will they be satisfied with anything less than a repeat?
A lot of people won't. No. Yeah. A lot of people won't.
So it's going to be really interesting to kind of see how he responds. I think the team's going to be just fine. But I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to kind of pay attention to is how Urban starts answering questions and how he starts handling his press conferences and how he starts, does he start scaling back some stuff like he did towards the end of his time at Florida? Or will there just be a lapse at one point? Because that's always a risk in the Big Ten that a team loses a game that it shouldn't, i.e. Virginia Tech last year. Right. Will that happen again this year? I don't think it's this game. I think Ohio State's going to come up just on, we're defending our national championship. This is the team that almost screwed us out of it last year. And I think Ohio State wins this game easily. But yes. I think that's something to keep an eye on through the season. Is anything like that floating around in your head? Is that kind of a...
No. Although I know what you're talking about. At the end of the last couple of years, he was the head coach at Florida. I thought Urban was kind of a jerk. And that's largely because how he comported himself with the media and with other public interactions, and clearly that's a situation where pressure is bugging him here. Yeah. I have to take what he says because he's been asked about this. Maybe it's not something that shows up in national media. It certainly does show up in more local stuff. Since he came back to Ohio, everyone saw the contract that he had with his kids and his family, and he had to agree to that stuff and scale back his time, spend more family time. This was all his family said. You can't return to coaching if you don't agree to this. from everything that I've read, that has continued. Now, clearly, being the head coach of the national championship football team, that creates a different kind of pressure. It creates different demands on your time. I have no way of knowing, if the stuff that he said he would do when he came to Columbus he's still doing. And you just have to wait and see. There's only one way to find out. But you make a good point, because wins, he beats Ohio State to win his first title, and then he's back 2 years later, 2 or 3 years later, and stuff very clearly. He was in a different mindset, and after that happened, clearly a much different mindset. As far as this game goes, how you usually, the reporters will ask players who you think about a particular opponent. Are you looking ahead to this one because of what happened this year? And the players are always careful to say no. We're just here playing the team in front of us, and Ohio State's players have been saying yes. we remember that game. My normal neuroses wants me to say this is going to be a tighter game than I think. Replacing Bosa is tough, although I'm curious. Joshua Perry has been practicing on the defensive line. That could be a fun kind of wrinkle to watch. And there is a host of younger players to fill in. So if Bosa has to be replaced by a platoon, that's not too tough to do. The offensive stuff is hard. Outside Jalen Marshall, Dontre Wilson, Corey Smith, they're both two H-backs and wide receiver, but in some ways those are interchangeable parts, and they're all sitting out. There's a Braxton Miller guy. Remember him?
Yeah, I do actually. He just lost in all this conversation after he announced his position switch. But yeah,
the coaches, Urban said in his weekly news conference this week that he has been very pleased with how Braxton has come along as receiver, and that is encouraging to hear as you go into this game, especially with the suspensions. And then the other thing that Urban said was one thing that we know that Braxton can do is take a snap and go. So.
I was just going to say, when has too many quarterbacks ever been a problem, right? Now you've got the Wildcat in the wrinkle.
I fully expect. I don't know if it'll be this game or not. I fully at some point, not. We'll see in September. At some point, Barrett, Cardale Jones, Braxton Miller will all be in the same backfield at the same time, and the other team's defensive coordinator is going to be like, timeout. I don't want to do with this.
Who's taking a snap, right? Yeah.
14 points, maybe 2 touchdowns is a bit of a stretch in what should be a pretty cool, pretty tough atmosphere in Blacksburg. But I think Ohio State will have control of this game start to finish. Just based on the emotion and memory of last year, and then we'll get into the grind and see what happens.
Let me ask you a personal question. Being a Buckeyes fan, who do you want to see under center on Monday night? Starting the game.
I don't know that I have a preference. JT Barrett won the position last year for a reason, right? And held it until he was injured for a reason. I assume those reasons are still in place. Cardale's grown up a lot. It's hard for me to say what kind of strides he's made in practice, but I assume if those guys improve at the same rate, that JT Barrett's still going to be the guy.
Yeah. But
we'll find out.
I've heard he's the locker room favorite.
He was voted a captain. He's a third year in the program, but he's a sophomore. That's an unusual position for someone for even a redshirt sophomore. So that helps. But you watch feature stuff. Cardale seems to be a popular guy too, so it's really hard to say. I would note that the coaches by now probably know. As I said, we're taping this on Wednesday night, and that was Urban's goal, was to at least have in his mind who the guy's going to be by tonight. So somebody knows. The rest of us won't find out until Monday.
We wait.
Yes, we wait. But like we've been waiting all summer, and college football is back. and we will have this is sort of what we're going to do all through the season. Hope you guys can join us, and Carla, enjoy the games enjoy the games. They're freaking games this weekend.
I know there's games. I'll know that again as I'm sitting every year. I gripe about this on the show. Thursday night. Why does Vanderbilt open at home on Thursday night?
Again,
yeah, against the Western Kentucky team that will probably win the game. Actually, that's going to be kind of like my big kind of pick of the week. I think Western Kentucky beats Vandy. But yeah, Thursday night I sing in the choir at a church directly across the street from Vanderbilt Stadium. Continuing to the cluster of traffic is the fact that the final Titans preseason game is happening tomorrow night here in Nashville, and it's the last Nashville Sounds minor league baseball team home game for the season.
Have you bought a helicopter yet? We've talked about this before. We have
talked about the helicopter. Yeah, there's a place to land it right across the street too.
All I'm saying.
Yeah. We need to work on this. So yes, I will definitely be saying "Hooray, college football" while I am sitting in traffic tomorrow trying to get to church.
I'll send you play-by-play texts from Vandy in Western Kentucky.
From Vandy in Western Kentucky. Yeah.
It's not looking good. Carla, thank you once again.
Thank you as always.
Guys, come back next week. We will be here, and please join us for the rest of the season on the Carla and Crappy Show. Have fun. We'll talk to you later.